14:30 hours, South China Sea. The sky above the South China Sea shimmered in the midday heat. Below, an American MH-60R Romeo helicopter from the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group hovered silently over a patch of open ocean, its dipping sonar trailing beneath the waves, tracking what intelligence sources identified as a Chinese-type 039 AUN-class diesel-electric submarine. Everything about this flight was routine, until it wasn't. At 14:32 hours, a transmission crackled over open frequency.
Foreign military aircraft, you are entering Chinese territorial airspace. Alter your course immediately.
The message came not from a ground station, but from a Z-10 attack helicopter closing in fast from the west. According to sources obtained by Global Warfare Report, the Chinese aircraft had been scrambled 28 minutes earlier from Xiamen Air Base with direct orders to discourage U.S. naval air activity in the region. But what began as a warning flight would soon become a tactical mistake Beijing never intended to make. 14:35 hours. The Z-10 pilot executed a low pass across the Romeo's nose at just 500 meters. Close enough for the American crew to see the red and gold PLA insignia glinting on its fuselage. But there was one problem. The engagement point was 50 nautical miles from any Chinese territorial boundary, squarely in international airspace. The U.S. crew didn't react. No sudden maneuvers, no radio acknowledgement, just calm silence and data collection. Because the Romeo wasn't only tracking a submarine, it was also listening. Mounted beneath its fuselage were ALQ-210 electronic support measure pods, advanced sensors capable of detecting, identifying, and recording every emission across the electromagnetic spectrum. Radar frequencies, communication patterns, even engine harmonics, all of it was being captured. Every second, the Z-10 remained nearby. It was unknowingly feeding the Americans an intelligence goldmine. 14:38 hours. The Chinese pilot, unaware that his aircraft had already become a digital open book, fired off 2 flares, one on each side of the Romeo's flight path. It wasn't an attack, it was posturing, a message of defiance. The American response was subtle but devastating. The Romeo's sonar operator reactivated the dipping sonar array, sending it plunging back beneath the surface directly above the Chinese submarine. Within seconds, the sub's crew realized they were still being tracked and panicked. The submarine crash dived, creating a cascade of cavitation bubbles that lit up sensors across the entire carrier strike group. In submarine warfare, noise means death, and that single panicked maneuver turned the stealthy Yuan class into the loudest object in the ocean. According to defense analysts interviewed by Global Warfare Report, that moment alone compromised the submarine's mission, all because a single helicopter pilot tried to intimidate the U.S. Navy. 14:44 hours. For nearly 12 minutes, the Z-10 continued shadowing the American aircraft. The Chinese pilot's frustration was clear, circling, banking, and posturing aggressively. The Romeo's crew, however, remained professional and unshaken. Then came the escalation. The Z-10 pilot powered up his fire control radar and locked onto the American helicopter. Inside the Romeo, a brief tone sounded, a radar lock alert. The pilots glanced at each other, silent, steady. According to intelligence sources, what followed was the most comprehensive live demonstration of U.S. electronic warfare superiority the region had seen in years. 14:45 hours aboard the USS Roosevelt, the electronic warfare officer issued a single command. Within seconds, an EA-18G Growler, orbiting 40 miles north, activated its ALQ-99 tactical jamming pods. What happened next turned the encounter into a nightmare for the Chinese pilot. The Z-10's radar display began to distort, first with static, then with chaos. The Romeo's radar signature split into a dozen ghost contacts. Some appeared flying backwards, others miles away, even one showing directly behind the Z-10's own tail. Beijing's pilot had no idea what was happening. His lock had vanished, replaced by what looked like an electronic hallucination. To the Americans, it was just another day of testing full-spectrum dominance. 14:47 hours. The Growler's jamming sequence flooded the Z-10's radar with broadband interference, rendering its systems effectively blind. The Chinese pilot toggled switches in desperation, adjusting frequencies, increasing power, even rebooting the radar. Nothing worked. Meanwhile, the U.S. helicopter crew maintained altitude and heading, steady, silent, collecting everything. For every second the Z-10 struggled, the Romeo's ESM pods logged new data, frequency agility patterns, power modulation curves, pulse repetition intervals, all critical information for future countermeasures. According to defense intelligence intelligence analysts, this single encounter provided the U.S. Navy with enough raw data to refine jamming algorithms across multiple platforms. What Beijing saw as a moment of confrontation, Washington viewed as an opportunity. 14:52 hours. The Chinese pilot, realizing his radar was failing, decided to make it personal. He closed to within 500 meters, bringing his Z-10 directly alongside the American helicopter. Through the cockpit glass, he could see the Romeo's door gunner manning the GAU 21.50 caliber machine gun, not aimed but clearly ready. Both aircraft hovered in tense proximity. Two machines, two ideologies, one silent standoff over international waters. The Americans said nothing, but Beijing's pilot had already made his mistake. Every transmission he sent, every radar pulse he emitted, every system he activated was being recorded, analyzed, and decrypted in real time. According to global warfare report sources, that 20-minute exchange compromised not just the helicopter's radar signature, but the encryption protocols of its entire communication network. 14:58 hours. As the encounter neared its 30th minute, the Romeo's crew finally transmitted on open frequency. Chinese military aircraft. This is United States Navy aircraft operating in international airspace in accordance with international law. We will maintain course and altitude. The tone was calm. The message, absolute. The Chinese pilot had learned what most adversaries eventually do. The U.S. Navy doesn't need to shout. Its technology does the talking. 15:04 hours, South China Sea. For the next 40 minutes, the Chinese Z-10 pilot tried everything he could to salvage his mission. But the more he tried, the worse it got. He attempted 14 separate radar locks, switching between air-to-air and air-to-surface modes, each one failing faster than the last. Every pulse, every frequency hop, was recorded by the MH-60R's sensors, digital fingerprints of Beijing's frontline attack helicopter. To U.S. analysts watching the live feed aboard the USS Roosevelt, this wasn't a confrontation. It was a demonstration. 15:09 hours. The Romeo's FLIR thermal camera tracked every move, every maneuver of the Z-10, every engine surge. The footage was in high-definition infrared, capturing more than just video. It mapped the helicopter's heat signature, exhaust ports, 450 degrees Celsius, transmission housing 180 degrees, rotor hub, visible thermal bloom at every pitch change. Each number was now stored in the Navy's threat library. Future missile systems could use these exact heat maps to lock onto a Z-10 from more than 50 miles away. The Chinese pilot didn't know it, but in trying to intimidate the U.S. Navy, he was teaching them exactly how to destroy his aircraft. 15:12 hours. Frustrated, the Z-10 pilot began close-in intimidation maneuvers. Sharp dives, sudden rolls, violent pitch changes. Each move was meant to force the Romeo into a defensive reaction, but the MH-60R, built on the battle-tested Black Hawk frame, held steady. It could pull tighter G-loads and recover faster than its Chinese counterpart. Inside the Z-10, warning lights flickered, hydraulic pressure dropped, transmission temperature spiked. The helicopter was beginning to strain under its own aggression. Beijing's pilot had crossed into what American aviators call the find-out stage. 15:15 hours. According to defense sources, the Z-10's WZ-9 engines were now running at 105% of maximum continuous power, well past safe limits. The overheat warning tone echoed in the cockpit, but the pilot silenced it and pressed harder. From the Romeo's cockpit camera, the Z-10 looked like a machine on the verge of tearing itself apart. The pilots didn't need to engage. The laws of physics were already doing the work. Meanwhile, the U.S. crew's ESM systems continued collecting radio chatter, intercepting every burst of Chinese communication. Analysts later confirmed that the frequency hopping pattern used by the Z-10's data link was predictable and outdated, traceable to encryption standards from 2003. In modern warfare, that's an eternity. 15:19 hours. When the Z-10 attempted to reacquire radar lock for the 15th time, something different happened. The jamming pattern changed. The EA-18G Growler began using smart jamming, dynamically shifting frequency bands faster than the Chinese radar could react. To the Z-10's onboard computer, the American helicopter no longer existed, then reappeared, and in 12 different places at once. Radar anomaly, the Chinese pilot radioed, his voice barely steady. But there was no anomaly. It was electronic dominance in action. The Romeo's sensor operator muttered under his breath, "We've got him wide open." 15:24 hours. The Chinese pilot made one last gamble, activating his electro-optical targeting system to try for a visual lock. What he didn't know, the instant he did, the Romeo's sensors identified the exact model and software version of his targeting pod. That single scan revealed a vulnerability, one that US engineers could now exploit to jam or spoof every Chinese aircraft using the same system. According to intelligence officials interviewed by Global Warfare Report, this 72-minute encounter compromised an entire generation of Chinese avionics. 28 hours. As the engagement dragged on, the Z-10's flight performance deteriorated rapidly. Hydraulic pressure continued to fall. The control stick felt heavy and unresponsive. Engine exhaust trails showed faint black smoke, a sign of thermal stress. Inside the Romeo, the American crew remained calm, efficient, unhurried. Their mission clock ticked past 1 hour. At this point, Beijing's pilot had achieved nothing. He hadn't forced the US Navy to withdraw. He hadn't disrupted their sonar operations. And worst of all, he'd given them complete electronic visibility of his platform. 32 hours from the carrier, SPY-1 radars locked briefly onto the Z-10, not as a threat response, but as a reminder. The pilot's threat display erupted with new signals, dozens of radar sources suddenly lighting him up from over the horizon. He realized what it meant. The entire US strike group was now watching him. FA-18 Super Hornets had already begun launching from the carrier deck, not for engagement, but presence. A silent show of force that needed no words. 36 hours. By now, the Romeo's operators had gathered terabytes of signal data, radar pulse codes, communication encryption, engine harmonic profiles, rotor acoustic signatures. Each piece would be analyzed, cataloged, and integrated into US threat identification databases, allowing American systems to recognize and counter any Z-10 anywhere in the world. Meanwhile, the Chinese pilots' onboard diagnostics were flashing amber and red. The Z-10 was overheating, its airframe creaking under excessive load. The Romeo maintained position, stable, unbothered, quietly victorious. 40 hours. Finally, after 72 minutes, the Chinese pilot disengaged. He banked east, returning toward Xiamen. His voice never came over the radio again. The Romeo's crew retracted the dipping sonar and resumed tracking the submarine below, which, after the chaos, was still trying to recover from its earlier dive. In the span of a single encounter, Beijing's helicopter had compromised its own radar systems, its communication encryption, its heat signature, and its acoustic profile, all without a single shot fired. According to defense experts, it was the most valuable intelligence collection event in the South China Sea since 2017-15. 46 hours. As the Growler returned to its patrol orbit and the Romeo climbed toward the carrier group, one pilot reportedly remarked over the intercom, "Well, that was productive." In military terms, it was an understatement. Every byte of data collected that day would shape the next generation of American counter-electronic warfare systems. Beijing's attempt to intimidate the US Navy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of demonstrating strength, it had exposed vulnerability, revealing not just how the Z-10 fights, but how it fails. By the time the Z-10 landed back in Xiamen, its engines were overheated, its systems scrambled, and its mission declared a successful interception by Chinese state media. But to those who understood what really happened, it was a technological defeat disguised as propaganda victory. The South China Sea had just witnessed another silent lesson in modern warfare, that in the age of electronic dominance, the quietest aircraft wins. And once again, America hadn't needed to fire a single shot. Global Warfare Report, analyzing the unseen battles that shape our world. Bye for now.